you need to pray about it or you need to read the Bible. And need I mind you, like I'm 14, 13 years old. I didn't have the guidance from people like that was close to me to really like depend on or to be able to reach out to for help. And growing up, like therapy wasn't always like encouraged. It's not saying like it was looked down upon, but it was just never a thing growing up.
You took Dr. Brown's class back in community college. You remember him? Something he
Yes.
said that stuck with me was like 3 relationships are very important.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Breaking Bread podcast. My name is Dan. This is Ale, and welcome, everybody. Welcome all. Thank you guys for joining us here today. We're super stoked to do another episode with you guys here. It's definitely been a bit of a busy season for myself, and I know it's been a busy season for Ale too. But yeah, man, we definitely want to get the ball rolling here and just keep it going, man. We're so excited to be here.
Yeah, I mean, like by the time y'all see this and everything, it's gonna be released like consecutively. But
Yeah.
like, there's a bigger like gap between when we've done these videos. Just life happened. We did our thing. We've been busy,
All adulting.
adulting. I'm doing,
Right.
more things on the sports side, doing that media content. Dan's over
Bro.
here, Mr. Director over here, Steven Spielberg.
Some, we gotta cook. We gotta cook behind the scenes type of thing. We gotta work in all different projects before we hit that quarter life crisis moment. But
Bro, I've been hating. I'm there. I'm there.
I think there's a part of me that just like I can feel it coming, and I'm just like, no, I just need to keep moving forward, bro.
I
No.
think low key, that's why I want to have a birthday party to avoid like the sadness like of thinking about all that. Like, all right, I'm just gonna go all out, go
Oh,
crazy.
it's okay. Oh, but yeah,
Oh,
no, yeah. It's like Alice said, we've been doing a lot of different things in a lot of different areas, with our personal lives, just work, but also just trying to grind, with other aspects and ambitions that we have. So yeah, man, we're just super excited here to be here again. And of course, just to kind of keep it going, like I said. So you want to kind of lead the way a little bit,
oh
Ale?
yeah. So this last episode was about Dan, interviewing me, getting to know how my upbringing, just different in-depth like aspects of that, why give them more insight as to why we're doing what we're doing, and showing like our intent, like just really dissecting it. And today's episode is going to be about Daniel, just me interviewing him, us getting to know what motivated him to do this, different aspects, how he views it, because I know we view things differently, as well as just different experiences in totality. Although a lot of similarities, there's still like different aspects that you will see once we get further into the interview. So
Yeah.
you have anything to
Yeah.
add?
No. Yeah, like you pretty much just hit the nail on the head type of thing because we definitely want to just kind of elaborate a little bit more as to like you said, like why we're doing this. We want to break the ice just to kind of give everybody a little bit of that feel of what to expect in these type of episodes when we do interview people, as well as just being able to have an open conversation, like just being able to just kind of have that open door opportunity for everybody to speak on their experiences, their upbringing, with the utmost respect of who we have on and whoever's speaking and the subjects that we touch upon. It comes from an internal aspect of like, wow, like we're really sharing these moments and just shedding a light on it. That's really what the purpose of this whole podcast is.
Okay, I'm right there with you. So to get started, I'm gonna circle back for our icebreaker.
Mm.
Then we're talking about a little bit like before we got on camera and stuff.
Mhm.
So for the icebreaker, do you base around this time period right now? With what day is it today? Today is November 1st, Friday. We're doing this at 11 p.m. at night. We just got done with Halloween.
Mhm.
So Daniel, do you?
Yes.
I got inspired by this by like seeing it, somebody we know posting it. So it's a good question. I do enjoy it. So I want
Yeah.
to us get into it for a quick sec before the interview.
Come on now.
Do you believe Christians should celebrate Halloween and or at least participate? What does Halloween mean to you? How do you think like it impacts Christianity in the grand scheme of things?
Mm.
Yeah, just take it away.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. What a way to really break the ice here before our interview, man. It's a tricky question. I feel like it definitely comes around every year around Halloween, where a lot of Christians, a lot of religious people, like they have their strong beliefs on it. And for me, growing up, like I grew up in a strict like religious household. Like I wasn't allowed to like celebrate it. Like I was always told it was bad. I saw everybody else trick or treating, and I'm just like, dang, like, all right, as long as I get to get candy, like it is what it is. But I think the older that I got, I think there was a part of me that just kind of like wanted to rebel a little bit because I'm like, I never got to do it as a kid, but like when I was a teenager, I was like, ooh, okay, like I'm the youngest of three, by the way. So I feel like I definitely was able to get away with some things. And this was one of those things where I'm like, okay, like I'm gonna go out with friends, I'm gonna do trick-or-treating. Not I never even had the actual trick-or-treating experience before, but like to be able to like dress up and do something like that, like I will say as a teenager, I did feel a little bit rebellious because it was just like forbidden to do any type of Halloween within my house. But I think just to kind of quickly explain the whole overview, if other people, especially Christians, should celebrate Halloween, like honestly, man, like you know, everybody's entitled to living in their own way. Like, you have their own beliefs, their own morals of how they view different things. Like, there are certain aspects that, like, I do strongly, like, would agree of, like, okay, like, maybe it's not okay to do certain things that, like, I don't feel comfortable doing with. But I feel like if you're doing it in the aspect of, like, okay, we're just going to dress up and we're just going to fellowship with friends, then I don't really see it as a big deal like that, to be honest. I'm not the one to like partake in like satanic or any type of anything like that. Like even like in a Ouija board, I'm like, nah, bro, like that's not me. Like I don't be playing around with that type of stuff. But like I feel like if it's just a simple dressing up and just kind of hanging out with friends and eating candy or something like that, like I don't see any harm in it. And funny enough, me and Ale briefly talked about this. Like, if you think about it, like Thanksgiving, like it's kind of like overviewed as a day for everybody to eat. But if you look at the history of it, like Thanksgiving kind of started off as like like as genocide. If you think about it, like if you people coming and colonizing Native Americans, yeah. So, and but it wants to be disguised as like a time of fellowship. But if you look at the root of it, then I guess we can pick and choose what we consider is right or wrong. But I guess it just depends on everybody, man. So
Wouldn't you think with that point, just to like child, we want to
yeah,
further think here and not just like have one perspective.
for
With
sure.
that like line of thinking, how you said for Thanksgiving, how you said it correlates with Halloween as well with the intent and everything. Even though for Halloween your main thing is like dressing up, having candy, hanging out with friends. But like isn't the those are two wrongs, they don't make a right in that
Mhm.
sense of like, yeah, how I don't know the history behind Halloween. I guess I wish
Yeah.
we would do more of our homework. That's on me to like really have that in there. But let's say the origins are, more satanic, more like in terms of Christians and stuff.
Yeah.
So wouldn't just partaking in like even a little bit of like the positive aspect still be like participating in the negatives the same way we talked about Thanksgiving currently with that like just using that line of logic?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And definitely like at least from where you're coming from, like how you said, like I'm not too familiarized with the upbringings or the origins of Halloween like that. Like I can only explain to you from like a Christian perspective of like how I was taught or like what I was told what Halloween was. But just to go back to what you said in the line of thinking, like I would agree, like, yeah, it is kind of like partaking in the origins of these things. And I guess it just also falls on like just the intention that you have, like if the intention is like, okay, like we're gonna be celebrating, because of its origins, or is this just kind of like an excuse to like, okay, like let's just go out and have fun or just fellowship or do something, and I feel like that same line of logic kind of falls into like a lot of different things. Like I guess right now the big thing that's going on is like politics, especially with elections literally being like a couple of days away. If someone were to say like I am a Republican or I'm a liberal, like I or like a Democratic. And so for me, I'm just like, okay, like, people have this perspective of like when someone says like, oh, like I'm conservative, I'm a Republican, then people already have that preconceived concept like idea of like this is how they look or how this is how this group looks. But when you actually get to know and just see the root of it, like you really just see like, okay, like there's no harm in it. Like there's like not every conservative, not every liberal, like whatever group, like they're not all the same in the way that like society wants to perceive it as. And I think a lot of times maybe like that could also fall in the same lines of with like religion or like even Christianity of like the way it looks and just kind of like, oh, like in that perspective. But yeah, I feel like it just kind of falls down with just the intention that you have, with doing these things.
Okay. Last question about it. So what would you value more in terms of like just thinking not like just for the sake of time and getting on for not politics but for the holiday aspect.
Yeah.
And does intention matter? Does that trump? Uh, no pun intended. Does that trump tradition in that sense of like, okay, my intention is to just have fun with my friends. I understand what Halloween was for. Thanksgiving, my intention is to be thankful with my family, stuff my
Mm,
face.
yeah.
Or this tradition is that like too embedded to the weeds to the roots to like stuck in to really like
Mm,
shape that to really change the way it is viewed, the way that the power it holds.
yeah. No, no, that's a really good question, man. And interestingly enough, the thing, like while I guess we're on the subjects of holidays, like I don't know if you would consider Cinco de Mayo a holiday, but like they like how you said, like in that example, people affiliate like Cinco de Mayo, like, oh, it's a Mexican like celebration day. But
Cinco
if
de
you
Drinko,
literally, huh?
Cinco de Drinko.
Yeah, Cinco de Drinko, like all these things literally like coming up with these like, oh, excuses to like drink, to go crazy, to celebrate. But like if you actually go to Mexico or you speak with like a a Mexican family, like Cinco de Mayo or Cinco de Drinko, like really has nothing to do with like Mexican tradition. Like Dia de los Muertos is more traditional to Mexicans and to Mexico, but when you look at a holiday like Cinco de Mayo, like it's like an American made holiday to have that excuse to like, oh, like to get drunk or whatever to celebrate, but and has some affiliation to like Mexico or Mexicans, but in reality, it has no meaning to it. Like it's not the day of independence. It doesn't mean anything like that. Like I know that there's some story to it or like context, but like it's not that like big of a deal the way that it is here. So to go back to the whole like tradition and like the intention, yeah, like it's definitely tricky, just because there's that like gray line or that gray area of like, man, like oh, am I just using this as an excuse to just like do this? But like there's other people that stay true to the tradition. But yeah, no, like that's a good question. Like I think, yeah, it's different perspectives, different minds, different ways to like look at it.
Mhm. Great points. If for any of our viewers, let us know in the comments. What do you guys think? Should Christians still celebrate Halloween? And does intention or tradition matter? Like which one does it, or does
Mhm.
neither? Let us know what you guys think. Let us know. We'd
Yeah,
love to hear it. I'd love to circle back on these topics. So we talk
yeah,
about it all day. Maybe we come with do our homework a little bit,
yeah.
so we have things more like different aspects to talk about. If the tradition is just too deeply rooted for
Hmm.
us to even consider intention. So,
Absolutely, I agree.
mhm. So now we're bringing in. We're starting off the interview, getting to know Daniel more in depth, more of who he is, what made him this
What
way.
made what?
um, so to start it off with, tell us about what brought you and your family to church, and just like what like denomination did you guys really follow, and then we could go from there. Just start
Yeah,
off from straight from the beginning, age,
yeah.
family. Hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I pretty much grew up in the church my entire life. Like literally, I recall my mom telling me that while she was pregnant with me, she was attending the church that like I grew up in. And as far as I can remember, I was like maybe 5, 6 years old, however much the brain can recall back your earliest ages. But I remember growing up there with my two older brothers, day in, day out type of thing. We grew up in a Christian household. Um, and on my dad's side, they grew up Catholic, which was interesting because I think over time I was just like, huh, like it just kind of like intrigued me of like, the difference of like different beliefs of like Catholicism and Christianity, but like I never had any affiliation with Catholicism like that. But I did notice like the difference when I would go visit my grandma when I was younger, when and she was like a hardcore like Catholic, like to this day, God bless her soul. But and I've noticed the difference between her house and my house and how things were a little bit differently. Um, and pretty much like the way when I say like we were in and out, like it was literally like church, Christianity, like that was just like the root of like everything that I did, everything that we would do as a family. Like my parents were very like to the book with everything that they would try to teach us. So growing up, like there was not much that I knew outside of just like church or Christianity. So I definitely did. I feel like I lived behind like some closed doors because there were definitely a lot of restrictions that I had as a kid of what I could and couldn't do. As I mentioned in the beginning, like I wasn't even allowed to celebrate Halloween. But yeah, man, like I definitely feel like that was just kind of like my upbringing of like growing up in a very, I want to say like kind of a strict household in the beginning, but over the years, the more that I got older, like the more it became more lenient and stuff like that. So yeah.
Hmm. Earlier you said, talking about like Halloween, how you were rebellious at a certain point. What made that side of you come out? Was it just being curious and wanting to explore other things behind that closed door you were referencing, or was it just you being frustration, feeling left
Mhm.
out, anything, looking from the outside in, the meme of Ralph looking out the window from Ed, Edd n
Yeah,
Eddy?
yeah,
Was
yeah.
like
No,
what caused that curiosity to explore further, and what was it that like really like resonated with you from that?
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think definitely, like I mentioned, a lot of it really did come when I was a teenager, and I feel like a lot of us who were back in our teenage years or people who are teenagers now, like, you're definitely in a different time of your life where you're just like understanding yourself, you're adapting to everything, like mood changes, puberty, like all this other stuff. So I think that like a lot of it was rooted in that of like I wanted to be rebellious because growing up I was just kind of like, hey, like I need to walk on this straight line, like you need to listen to this, you need to follow this, you need to do as you're say type of thing. And I don't want to view it like in my household that it was like very like negative, but like as a kid, like that's just kind of how it felt sometimes. Like it definitely helped me build some character, like I will say that,
Mhm.
like some of the things that were implemented, some of the things that like I grew up. But I think when I was a teenager, I definitely did want to, like how you said, like I would see my friends, I would see other people like doing these things. So a part of me was like, yeah, like I definitely want to partake in that. Like I feel like I had FOMO for real. Like I'm just like, man, like how do they get to do these stuff? And like I'm over here having to like attend like a church service while like my friends are all out, like to like a school Halloween event, for example. And so yeah, so I think there was a little bit of like just my age of like wanting to be rebellious and at the same time like curiosity, just because it's one of those things where like living behind closed doors, like you're just kind of curious of like, hey, what's on the other side, like what's it like over here. So I would say it is a little bit of both.
Mhm. Me personally, I do know what your home life was like. Again, it's not saying that it was like bad or like
Hmm.
Carrie, where you're locked in a
Yeah,
closet all
no, it
day.
wasn't like Carrie, they're all gonna
But
laugh at you.
can you describe what was like? Because you know, from the brief moments from when we were younger, when I first
Yeah,
started attending church, I remember there was being a night service, as well as the school you went to, and before
yeah.
that, when you lived in outside of Chicago, farther away from that area. Can you like give more details upon like the strictness and the restraint that you had for the
Yeah.
viewers to understand?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so like I mentioned, I grew up in church my whole life. I noticed how like deep we were into it. Like, well, now like looking back on it was I we what we attended it, my family and I attended a church in Chicago. And my family and I, we live like 40 minutes south from Chicago. We live like right at the border. We lived in a city called Calumet City. It's like right at the border of like the state of Illinois and Indiana State. So and it was like a 40-minute drive to Chicago, and that's without traffic. And some of you that know that city traffic, like it adds like time. But yeah, so literally there were like maybe three like church services. It was like Sunday, Tuesday, and Friday. And literally like every single like every week, like my parents were very like on it of making sure that my brothers and I were going. Like even if it's a school night, like we made sure like we were always there, like driving those 40 minutes there. And by the time it was done, it was like 9 or 10 p.m. And sometimes on certain events, it was until like 1 a.m. that they would like have church service. And like we had to make that drive back. And I just remember like always sleeping in the car, having to go do that. Another area, like you mentioned, when we eventually moved to Chicago, I actually attended a private Christian school in Chicago. It was nothing bougie, but it was definitely like, yeah, just going back to those
Shout
like
out to
root.
Twin.
Yeah, for real. Twin knows what it is. Yeah. Um, but yeah, like I went to a small Christian private school, and again, like I feel like even attending middle school there, um, it wasn't like a regular middle school experience, like it was definitely something where like, hey, there was always some type of like some type of work of like, hey, like, we're gonna do like chapels on Sundays, or not Sundays, but like on certain days, or like, hey, we're gonna read the Bible. It was always something rooted to that. And the fact that like, because my parents are blue collar workers, so they would like go and they would help clean up to make sure that they were like helping some type of financial assistance to make sure that I was there. Like I don't know to this day why I wasn't just in a regular middle school, but I remember like going there and my parents were like cleaning up like trying to make sure to be able to pay for it. And other areas like in my high school years, I that was usually around the time when I was very much invested in the church, and I'm sure we'll probably touch on that a little bit later. But that was a time when I was very much invested in the church, in my church, same church, by the way.
Mhm.
But at that time, like there was a part of me where I'm like, I need to put in like my time in church, in these things that like I was taught growing up. Like I didn't really do like sports. I rarely did clubs. Like it was always just like, no, like I need to prioritize church over like school events, any school clubs, anything like that. So
I don't mean to
but
cut
yeah,
you off. My bad.
go for it.
Question.
So without
Answer.
hindsight, but looking back on like, you felt that urgency of needing to, you need to volunteer, participate with church activities, everything like
Hmm.
that. What was going through your mind, again, without hindsight, during that time period? What was going through your mind as a motivation to do that? Was it just what all you knew, or like, is that like, okay, my family is doing this, my brothers are doing that? If you
Yeah.
just, give more insight to that aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, so definitely there was some type of motivation behind it. So, like I mentioned, my family was very involved in that church for many, many years. And it got to the point where my family was like part of my family was employed at the church, and the other part was like really devoted, like day in, day out within the different ministries. And like ministries is kind of like Sunday school, like youth group, and all these other like evangelistic like groups and like prayer session like that's what I mean by like ministries and stuff like that, for those that are of you of watching and may not know. But yeah, like my parents were very involved. Like they started serving, they started like volunteering their time there. um and same with my brothers. My oldest brother was a part of the media team there, and my other brother, he was very involved with like leading the children's ministry, like Sunday school and stuff like that. And so for me, there was a part of me where I'm like, man, like I feel that urge that like I need to do something myself too. Like I need to participate, like I need to volunteer my time because my family's doing it, so like I need to do it. And I recall I started like volunteering in the children's ministry while I was still a kid, like while I was still like 12 years old. Like I would be helping up set up, I would be helping up like with the audio equipment and stuff like that, like little stuff. But then when I turned 13, I remember that at the church they held like a workshop where it's like, if you want to like volunteer in the church in any type of ministry in any department, like do this workshop. And I remember I did it, and I signed up for the youth ministry because all the other, like my parents, my brothers, they were doing other things besides the youth ministry. And I remember I was like, okay, like maybe this is it for me. And I remember signing up. And in my idea, I'm a 13-year-old, like doing this in my head, like I'm thinking, oh, like, I'm gonna help set up for events, like I'm gonna be able to like stuff like that. Like, you would think that a 13-year-old, like in my head, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna help set up, plan stuff out. Like for me, like I love organizing, I love doing stuff like that, even as a kid. And now like it's been so helpful. But literally, like I kid you not, the person that was overseeing the youth department, they literally told me like, hey, you're gonna be a youth leader. And in my head, I'm just like, okay, like I'm kind of honored, but I'm just like, bro, like I'm a 13-year-old. Like, like what do you mean by this youth leader? And for those of you that may not know, like the youth leader there is like someone that was appointed or like was called up to be like, hey, like you are in a position where you can lead other people. I'm sorry, Ale, it's just, oh man, I just needed a little moment. My mind
You're
just kind of
you're
boggled
fine. You're
other
fine.
places. But
Could I like? All right. Could I ask you? During that time period of you signing up and everything, finding your place, seeing your family, like, okay,
mhm,
I got to find my place. was there any pressure? Did you feel any pressure doing that? And then on top of like that, was there any added pressure, if there was any,
Mm,
from
mhm.
them telling you you're gonna, you gotta lock in, you gotta lead these youth, at the fresh age of a preteen, 13?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I feel like there was a lot of more interpersonal pressure because I remember there was this one we there's like yearly like youth camp events that would happen, and I remember it was like my first year, excuse me, it was my first year like as a youth leader. And I remember that there were specific like dorms, like the guys had their section, the girls had their own sections, and like each youth leader was in charge of like a specific room of like, whoever was staying there and stuff like that. And so for me, I remember like I felt some internal pressure because I'm like, man, like I'm 13, 14 years old and I'm supposed to like lead guys that are like older than me, bro. Like some of these guys were like 17, 18 years old, 19, and I'm a 14-year-old. And for me, I kind of felt that pressure. I'm just like, man, like what if I say the wrong thing? Like what, you feel that pressure of just like, man, like that like so much can be said like wrong or right, like whatever. And so I felt that pressure more personally. Um, I will say during the time that I feel like could have been helpful for me at that age is having some guidance. I feel like maybe with the way of the structure of how things were at that time with the church, I don't, I never had that one-on-one like, counseling or like mentoring. And so for me, like during this time while I was volunteering in the church in many different areas for all these years, like a lot of it felt like I had to figure it out on my own. Like I could have gone to my family, but I there was that part of me like personally, I'm like, no, like if they can do it, I can do it too, type of thing. Um, but and I will say like there were probably people that were mentoring my family too along the lines that I didn't see at the time. But for me, like I didn't really have that older figure to like really look up to or to be able to ask for guidance. Like it was always like the responses were always like you need to pray about it or you need to read the Bible. And need I mind you, like I'm 14, 13 years old, and like and you're telling me like this is what I should do. But like sometimes I'm just like, hey, like I'm still trying to figure out my own life. Like I'm trying to do these things right, like, and I feel like there was really that lack of guidance, that lack of mentorship, like personal mentorship, that I feel like I didn't get, that I had to figure out all those years that I was within the church. I'm just like, bro, like I'm figuring it out as I go. It's a trial and error. What works for me, what I feel like it works for other people, for me to like actually guide people, guys that are younger than me, and throughout the years, I feel like that's something that I feel like it definitely did take a big toll, and just feeling that pressure of like, okay, like if something's wrong or if someone's going through something, like I need to figure out a way to like help them. I need to figure out a way to like find a solution or ultimatum or something like that. And so I definitely felt that pressure internally. It was never more so like somebody else was pressuring me to do things of like, you need to do it like this, or it was never from my family sometimes. Like it was never like, oh, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong. It was more so in my own mind of like, I'm pressuring myself that like I'm not doing enough, or like, hey, like I can do better, or maybe there's, all these different standards and like levels that I was putting on myself because I never had that guidance growing up. So I feel like that was the type of pressure I had.
When did you reach your breaking point? When was that pressure too much? When did you decide, okay, maybe I need to, you know, people around my age are, I'm having to do all this,
Yeah.
but then you see people around your age not having that, that internalized pressure from like, needing to guide other people, needing to,
Yeah.
do this, take people, be responsible for not only your own but other like people's spiritual walks, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
was that
No.
breaking point where you wanted to like, let me explore other options?
Yeah. No. Yeah. And before I get to that point, I think like what you mentioned too right now is like I definitely felt with that pressure that I was putting on myself that like and it went from beyond and like it started off like from me doing tasks for like the church to like me actually like feeling like I was responsible for some of these guys and girls like through their spiritual walks, through some of their emotional and difficult like life moments that they were going through. Like I definitely felt blessed and knowing that like people were comfortable enough to like come to me to ask for like advice and this is not me tooting my own horn but like this is what like I kind of wanted going into that ministry of like helping out youth, which eventually helped me further along in my career because I finished with a bachelor's in social work and my specific focus in my career path is like I've been wanting to help people and this is something that definitely helped me but um like you said like having that sense of responsibility for somebody else and having that breaking point of that pressure I want to say maybe when I was like 19 years old I just had it like I was dealing with stuff from from like how I mentioned like when I was 13, 14 years old when I was already getting involved like I was dealing with personal struggles of like depression and stuff like that and then fast forward to like when I was 17, 18 years old like I
Hold on, hold on,
struggled
hold on.
with
You said fast forward, but like you start off, you said your breaking point was 19, but then you said
yeah
fast forward to 17, 18.
yes so I'm getting to that point so like that's where like
But it
what
wouldn't be fast forward.
would it not no
Fast
I'm
forward
sorry okay
because
let's take it back and then fast forward and then it'll get
build
to the
up to
19
your breaking point was 19, but the build up was 17, 18, correct?
yes
Just to get the
yes correct
timeline, it's not even me
yeah
just being usual obnoxious myself, but make
yeah
sure we get a good timeline established.
yes I do apologize people I do apologize my
It's
brain
okay. He's
my my
nervous.
my
He's nervous. He's
my
opening up
brain
a
is just
lot.
kind of going all over the place when I ramble on but yes this is me
He has butterflies in his
okay
tummy.
so so yes to start off when I was 13, 14 years old, which was around the time that I was starting to get involved with the church, I was dealing with my own personal struggles of like depression and stuff like that. And then fast forward to when I was 17, 18 years old, I was dealing with another like existential moment in my life where I was resulting to like alcoholism. And then it was by the age of 19 of the breaking point. Um, it resulted to again, like I didn't have the guidance from people like that was close to me to really like depend on or to be able to reach out to for help. And growing up, like therapy wasn't always like encouraged. It's not saying like it was looked down upon, but it was just never a thing growing up. But during that time, like when I was 19, like I felt that like that pressure of like, hey, like I have these responsibilities, I have these tasks at church, at home, in my life. And by that time, when I was already 19, I was already involved in the children's ministry and I was also partaking in the youth ministry as well. And so having to balance both of those things out, like it was just a lot for me where it got to the point that it felt like I wasn't even doing it because I was, putting my heart into it. It just felt like a 9 to 5 of like, or just kind of like, hey, like I gotta check this task off. Like, oh, yep, like I came to Sunday church, I babysat other people's kids, and like that was it. Like, like that's where my mind was going to. Like, I didn't even have the passion for it. I didn't have the drive to like invest the way that I did, like when I first started off. And I remember that I sat down with like the main like directors that were like overseeing each of the ministries and I literally sat down with them. I'm like, hey, like I'm not in a good point in my life and I had to sit out. Like I made the decision to sit myself out of those ministries because I was just like, I'm not doing this with my heart. I'm not doing this with the intention of like I want to give back. Like and like for me personally, like I'm not the type of person to just kind of like, pardon my language, to half-ass things of like, hey, like it's either all the way or just none. And at that point, I was just kind of done. Like I sat down, I stopped going to church. Um, and I was just trying to figure my life out, man. And it was around the time when I was also in college too. Like I was in a community college, and I was just like, I need to make a decision. Like, am I gonna leave for school? Am I gonna stay here at home? Like, so I was trying to figure that stuff out too, like while like having this existential moment within my religious or faith, my spiritual walk.
Did you so obviously, like, for those who don't know, you made the choice to come, go to, Champaign first of all, leave Chicago, your home.
Which is a
Was
2-hour drive away. Like, I moved sorry, just for
you're
people
fine.
that don't know where Champaign.
Not just the way you said it was funny. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, no.
Sorry.
So I made the decision by that time of 2020 because I finished my 2 years of community college, and by 2020, I made the choice to, like, go to, um, a school that was away from home, which was only, like, 2.5 hours away from home, but it was away from home. And so at that point, my mindset just kinda shifted of like, "Okay, like, this is where my new
All right, all right.
beginning is, like, this is
Hold
where
on,
I'm
hold on.
going."
Let me get to the question then. Let me get to the question then.
Alright.
Did
Alright, sorry, I'm not
you
trying to take that away,
You're
but go
fine,
ahead.
you're fine. No, 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 you're fine. So, at that point when you made that decision, did you feel like you're also walking away from your spiritual life? That, this is you were touching on it before I interrupted you, but, like,
Mhm.
that this is a new beginning, that you're gonna leave that part of you behind? And, if so, what made you, like, where did you find comfort in doing that? Because that's a big risk, that's a big change. Because,
Mhm.
participating in church is something that all you know, being
Yeah.
part of that community is like all, what you're embedded in with mentally, that's where you are. And just
Yeah.
take us through that.
Yeah, so, I mean, like you said, it was definitely a big choice that I had to make in my life. I'm first generation. I was the first in my family to, like, leave for school. Like, my brothers, they went to school, but it was at home. Like, they stayed here in Chicago. Like, I was the first in my family to leave. So for me, I'm just like, man, like, that's scary. Like, that's a big step that, like, nobody else in my family has done. So, like, I have nobody to, like, really go to or ask, like, how it's like. um and before that, I actually had the opportunity to go to the school that I eventually ended up transferring to. I had the opportunity to go to that school right out of high school, but I had another little mini pivotal point at that time where I didn't want to go to college and leave home because that's all I knew was church, was my family, and I felt convicted where like, I felt convicted, but I also felt, like, guilty too, where I'm like, "Man, if I leave, like, I'm leaving the responsibilities that I have here." Like, I felt like that kind of guilt, like, if I go to school, like, what are they gonna say? What's everything that I've done so far? Like, what's gonna happen? So I actually made the choice to stay and do 2 years of community college here instead of going straight to out of home university with my friends right out of high school. But there was that part of me that, like, I was like, okay, you know what, like, if this is the opportunity, if this is God's plan, for me to go to that school again, like, I'm gonna apply and I'm gonna get accepted. And I did end up getting accepted to the same school that I denied the first time. And I'm like, I'm not, and at that point I felt comfortable with, like, actually shutting the door of, like, okay, like, this time I don't feel guilt, I don't feel anything. Like, I feel like everything that I did, like, it was done. Like, I kind of came to that point personally, and a few other things as well too that just kind of helped me make that decision. But at that point, I did kind of, like, stray away because, like, all I knew was that church community, and me moving away, I'm just like, I don't have that anymore. Like, I'm literally just kind of like a lone wolf. Like, I'm just like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where's my pack. And then, ironically enough, the same year that I transferred was also the same year of the pandemic. So that was also another like shift for myself and everybody in the world of like how do we adapt to this change of like being quarantined. So I definitely my first year at the university, it was in quarantine. Like I had my own little apartment and I was alone for the most part, but I eventually I long story short, I was studying in like this like cafe area and I got reached out to by by a guy who you know as Aaron, but he was affiliated with a church out there in Champaign. And a part of me kind of felt like I literally just kind of got out of this. Like I didn't leave on
Wait,
bad terms or nothing like that, but there were certain individuals that I'm just kind of like, "Oh, I know what that church culture, I know the questions they're gonna ask me, like, I already know the methods of approaches and everything like that was gonna come up," but, a part of me just felt like, "You know what? Because I knew this is all that I knew growing up." I'm like, "You know what? Like, let me give it a shot. Like, let me be open-minded to, like,
mhm.
giving it a try again."
Can we circle back real quick? You
Mhm,
never got to the part like you said the story, but what made like what was the decision as to why like did you once you left not after community college after the first what was it that made you decide to find like when you moved
mhm.
did you walk away from your spiritual life and if so what made you officially like want that door shut what went into that thought process.
Yeah. I think throughout the years, like because how I mentioned, like I never had that guidance, I never had that mentorship and stuff. Like I feel like I kind of had to figure out my own spiritual walk, my own faith, my own belief on my own. And like for the most part, like the older that I got as the years progressed, like I was able to kind of find a good rhythm to keep myself accountable. And by that time, like when I kind of left the church, like the best way to describe it is like I was shutting the door at the church culture, not more so on my own faith or belief or spiritual walk, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Like it wasn't me shutting the door on my faith. It wasn't me like completely walking away from what I grew up knowing, what my spiritual walk, the teachings, everything. Like I didn't walk away from that. It was more so me closing the door and shutting the door at church culture. Like that's what made me make that decision because again, long story short, my family ended up leaving that church, and I was the only one that was going to that church. And there was a part of me where I'm just like, oh, like, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing because I'm not leaving the church like my family did, or like whatever. And they had their own reasons for, after being devoted in the church for so many years, like 15 plus years. But and there was that part of me where I'm just like, man, like I'm trying to be my own person. Like I'm not trying to walk behind the shadow of like my family because, essentially as a kid, it felt like that. Like, me being starting up and getting involved with the church, it felt like, oh, I was just kind of following my family's footsteps. And then eventually when they departed from the church, I felt like that was my opportunity to be like my own person. I'm like, okay, cool. Like I'm my own person. I get to find my own rhythm, do my own pace, whatever. But then with my own personal like battles and stuff like that, like it was just too much for me that I just had to like shut the door because I'm just like, I'm not, it just felt like I was giving, 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 and I wasn't really receiving. And that was just the thing where, I guess if hopefully this answers your question of like why I decided to shut the door, it was because of that. Like I was burnt out. I wasn't getting anything out. It was always just kind of like pray about it, read the Bible, you got it. I'm just like, no, like there's more to it than just the little pep talks that I'm getting. Like I said, like really it was just the lack of guidance and just having that interpersonal mentorship that I didn't have, but eventually I did end up getting it, which is something that I felt like it was healing to me.
uh Talk about when you received that guidance. I know you briefly touched on when that started when you met Aaron
Mhm.
and just like from there.
Yeah, so just kind of like picking up what I was where I left off at, I was after the first year of being quarantined and literally not doing anything on my own, that what I thought was going to be like, yeah, the university life, whatever, college life. But then eventually like I said, I was studying, and I ran into uh Aaron, who was a part of a church group out there in Champaign. He was reaching out to people, and he told me that they were having a Bible study, a Bible group, literally right next to where I was studying at. And for me, like I know all too well about like Bible group studies and stuff like that. That's something that you and I like were also partaking in growing up. But for me, like I said, like at that time, because I had shut the door on the church culture, but not my faith, there was that part of me that kind of had like my walls up, because I'm just like, nah, like I know where this is going. Like it's just gonna be the usual church lingo, the hey, like this and that, like you should come to church, like that type of approach. And so for me, I'm just like, okay, like I know how to detect it, I know how to avoid it, this and that, because I grew up in it. And eventually, because I was also one of those guys too at some point. But there was that personal conviction within me, because while I was still alone living by myself during quarantine, like there were still times where like I was reading my Bible, I would pray, I would fast, like I would do these things on my own without having a church, without having someone teaching or leading me. Like I was taking these initiatives on my own. And so for me, like I felt that like drive, like that connection. I'm like, oh wow, like this isn't a coincidence that like I'm doing this with my own personal time, and then I all of a sudden get invited to like go to this church group or to be a part of like this Bible study. And I remember at that time I was like, no, like I'm okay. But like I said, they were doing the Bible study right next to me, and while I was studying, like I was overhearing their conversations, the discussions they were having. And I'm like, oh wow, like that's actually pretty cool. And especially because of the fact that like it was people my age that were doing it. Like, it wasn't just like a grown adult, like teaching everybody else, like, hey, this is what the word of God says, like, do this, do that. Like, no, it was actually like a discussion group with people our age. I was just like, wow, like, that's really interesting, because it seems like these guys and gals are like taking initiative of like having these open-ended discussions that I feel like we never really had that opportunity to do as much. It was more so just kind of listening to whoever's the special guest speaker at the time, like, so it was definitely a different change of pace of things.
So how did you pointed out the differences and everything as to
Mhm,
what drew you in compared to what made you leave.
mhm.
So what is it that like got you to stay, and how do you carry that in today, as 24 years young, how did that carry on into now and who you are in the present?
Yeah, I definitely say, because growing up, I was always surrounded within that community, just having a community in general. And I think as individuals, like we try to find our own community, whether if it's like through music, our beliefs, our interest, whatever it may be. And I think because I was always exposed to that growing up, especially like with Christianity and church and stuff like that, like I was able to like know the crowd a little bit more and just kind of like feel comfortable with it. And also just because like I'm a very engaging person, like I'm an extrovert, and I just love hanging out and talking with people. And so to me, growing up, like, oh wow, like this is an opportunity for me to meet new people, meet new friends. And we were just like coming out of quarantine, like still in quarantine, and I'm just like, bro, like I need some social interaction too. So it definitely clicked pretty quickly as well too. And one of the things that was mentioned, and I think it was building up to this moment, was I was finally able to get that guidance, like that mentorship that I've been seeking since I was a kid. I started to kind of slightly get involved with this new church out in Champaign, out in the college campus that I was at. Um, somewhat started to get involved, but I was still open-minded to like the discussions, to having one-on-one Bible studies and stuff like that. And so for me, I'm just like, wow, like I'm finally getting what I was seeking. And, all this time, like how I mentioned earlier, I was always giving, 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 giving. But now it felt like I was receiving. And that to me was like so refreshing, where I'm like, wow, like I never had that as much as I wanted to growing up as a teenager, which is why I feel like I went through so many struggles of like depression, alcoholism, and stuff like that, because I didn't have the guidance or somebody to go to that I could trust. And even at that age, when I was like 21, 22 years old, like I finally found that person where I was like, wow, like they were keeping me accountable. They were challenging the way that I was thinking, like spiritual and emotional and personal areas. And so that to me, I was like, wow, like that's what I needed. And to me, like that, growing up, I was always that, I feel like I was always kind of like that figure towards other people when they would like come to me and ask for advice, or like, hey, like they need a shoulder to cry on. Like I love it. Like I accept it. Like I welcome it, of like people being open and comfortable with me. But then there comes a point where I'm like, man, like I also need that person too, that I could cry to, that I can vent to, that I can be vulnerable with. But I didn't have that. And after all these years, like I finally did. And so I think that that really just kind of ignited, like, wow, like, you know what, like I feel that passion again that I had before. I feel like that drive to like wanting to like give back again. And so that really did, like I said, like that was a really healing moment, like a healing pivotal point for me. So
Last question. What made that, throughout the interview, throughout this episode, we were talking about longing for this guidance. And from
mhm,
the outside looking in, some might view like, oh, your family as like a source of guidance that the
mhm,
others may not have had.
yeah,
Not to say like how, not me, how I view it, but like how others may. What
yeah,
made you like want that, outside source of guidance, if that made sense, rather than going to your mother, going to your father, or going to your brother as you're the youngest? You assume that they have like more wisdom, more knowledge to provide, provide you with. What made the outside much more appealing or valuable in that sense?
yeah. Dang, now you're making it seem and feel like it's a therapy session for me. No, but it's a good question. Yeah, no, I think for me was just like I wanted to find that source outside of my family, or like even the people that I was really close with, was because some of the things that I was struggling with, like for example, like I mentioned, like alcoholism when I was 17, 18 years old. Like for me to just kind of like go to my family or to close friends of mine and say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with, and just having that like fear of like I'm gonna get judged, or like, hey, they're gonna look at me differently. Like that was really like the barrier that prevented me from wanting to open up of like personal struggles like that, and even just kind of like guidance too, because I feel like it's one of those things where like, oh, I'm showing a sense of vulnerability, or showing a side of me where I'm like, hey, like I don't have the answer to this. Like I always felt like I was gonna have that response of like being judged, or like ridiculed, or like looked at in a negative way, because, oh, like how do you not know the answer to this, or like, oh, how can you not figure this out, type of thing. And there were some times where like there were areas where I did get those responses. Like I was ridiculed for certain things that I questioned and stuff like that, whether it was in the church or in my family. Like, and that's stuff that like it discouraged me like at a young age. And so for me, like going into like this new church, I'm like, okay, like these people don't know me, they don't know my personal life, they don't know my family. Like if I open up to them, they're not gonna call my mom, they're not gonna tell people, they're not gonna gossip to people that I know. Like I wasn't worried about that. And so when I finally had the courage to like open up to people that I didn't know deeply, like it helped me to like even pursue other things like therapy. Like I mentioned, like it was nothing that was ever encouraged or it was ever brought up, but like as of like what, last year or 2 years ago, that's when I decided to take up therapy, because of that same thought process of like, okay, I'm talking to this person that doesn't know my personal life. And if I say things that are very vulnerable or deep hidden, like they're not going to say anything to anybody. So I think that that was where I knew how to make that decision of like who do I want to share certain things with and who I don't. So
Hmm. Um, to finish this off with, I have a couple of things, a question and something that just occurred to me.
okay.
You took Dr. Brown's class back in community college. You remember him? Something he
Yes.
said that stuck with me was like three relationships are very important in your life.
Hmm.
A peer, someone like how you and I walking a similar path, being able to talk, compare notes with.
Yeah.
A mentee, someone who's like wants to aspire to do the same as you, who you can give advice to, who you can provide just different knowledge, information that you wish you had back then.
Hmm.
And then last one be a mentor, someone providing guidance, someone where who currently is where you want to be.
Yeah.
And with that being said, is there anything you would go back and change for your younger self as a mentor to mentee, or as
Yeah.
a peer to peer? Is there any like advice you would give to your younger self?
Yeah. No, no, that's a great question. Dang, that's interesting. I think like now if I were to being where I'm at in my life now, and if I were to go back to like talk to my younger self like as a mentee, like I would definitely encourage my younger self to not be afraid to be vulnerable, because a lot of times like being who you are and being expressing yourself, being vulnerable, showing sides that like, hey, you're struggling, you begin to notice the people that will genuinely stick with you compared to the people that are only there just to see your good side. And just to kind of clarify that a little bit, like I know growing up as a kid, as a teenager, I only wanted people to see the good side of me. And and I feel like a lot of Christians, a lot of celebrities, a lot of people in the status, like they only want to show their good side, like they never want to show their bad, they never want to show the side of them struggling. And so that's why there's a following, because oh, you only see this individual when they're at their good moments, when they're at their highest. And so I feel like that applies to me a lot, especially when I was younger. I only wanted people to see the good, like never shed a tear, whatever. But I feel like now, being older, like I don't put on that mask of like, oh, I want people to see my good side. Like, no, like this is who I am. Like I'm someone that struggles. I'm a Christian that is constantly struggling. Like I'm not perfect, but I think like if you like take it back to like even just biblical scripture here just real quick, is like, you know Jesus, especially for Christians, especially for those Christians that are listening, it's like, hey, like Jesus came for the brokenhearted. Like he came here, he affiliated himself with the people that nobody else wanted to affiliate with, and I feel like that's a big takeaway, because it's just like, man, like you don't have to put yourself as an individual to pretend like, oh, this is who I am, just so that people can like me or so I can have a following. But if you show your true authentic self, like you'll know like who's genuinely there to be with you, to encourage you, to lift you up. And so I think that for me, at a younger age, I would tell myself to like show more of that vulnerability, to show more of that authentic self, because you begin to because I feel like I would have been able to pick out, okay, like this person is genuinely here to help me and support me, and this person's just here just because, oh, like, I'm known within the church, or oh, because I know this person, so they want some connection. So I would say just to stick to my true authentic self.
There you have it. Your true, authentic self. Christians who
Yeah.
struggle. I know I'm not like trying to make fun of it, but like
Yeah, yeah.
that's like if that's the message that like we would want the viewers to leave with. Even not as Christians, like be vulnerable. Find try to find that person you could find. You could, what is it called? Have confidence in to just share. And with that being said, thank you for sharing, Dan. Your story, the way you're able to be vulnerable. There's a lot of things I know you and I both want to touch on in our personal lives, but that would be freaking a 6-hour episode that no one has time for.
Right.
But everything we do touched on was very much important. We feel you could apply it even outside of church, which is very important. Doesn't have to just be in one, a specific four walls. It could apply anywhere, which is it's very
Yeah.
much, what is it called? A versatile story. Not to,
Yeah.
be annoying with sports, but for sports reference, there's a term called portability, which is how can this player can play on any team no matter where he's at. What does his skill set provide that? And I feel like that's the best way to describe your story, because there's so many people who go through something similar. Maybe it's not in Christianity, that can hopefully find, receive something from you being comfortable in telling your story, and how you were able to change that narrative of oh, you could have just left something that you originally grew up in, something that you knew, but
Mhm.
you could have just left that behind and left and let it be a negative thing, but now it's positive and it's impacted your life in a positive way, which is beyond amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can't wait for us to get more stories in, get more people in who feel comfortable in sharing as well.
Yeah. No,
Any
yeah.
last words? No, my bad.
No, you're good. You're good. No, yeah. Just thank you for giving me the opportunity, and thank you for people that are listening in, tuning in, to just being able to hear us out. Like, this is what we're here for. Like, this is
Mhm.
why we wanted to create this podcast, is shedding a light on people's vulnerabilities, on people's stories. Because, like you said, like, maybe it may not apply directly, exactly of how I grew up. It may not exactly apply to other people's stories, but like how you said, it could be versatile, of just like, wow, like, there's certain little things that I can pick up on, and just like
Mhm.
sympathize or empathize, like what like someone's going through. And I think it's just very important to just being able to discuss about these areas, because people might be going through something like that, and you may not even be aware of it. So it's always good to just be a listening ear.
Well, there you have it, guys. Thank you so much if you listened to the full hour and some change. Stuck around the whole time. Thank you.
Bro.
We'll be back again. Maybe just us two. Maybe we got an interview. You'll see. Well, that was Dan. This is Aleph. Thank you so much for listening to the Breaking Bread podcast. Y'all take care.